was fun. All right. Our second reader is David Heymann. David Heymann is an architect, contributing writer for Places Journal, and a University of Texas distinguished teaching professor. He is interested in what people want from nature. He's been a writer in residence at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston's Dora Maar House, the Rockefeller Foundation's Bellagio Center, and the Bogliasco
Foundation.
Oh my, Belasco Foundation. A visiting scholar at the American Academy in Rome and a participant in the Arctic Circle program. His architectural work has been variously published and recognized with design honors, including selection for Emerging Voices by the Architectural League of New York. Please join me in welcoming David.
So, as you were reading that list, I was just thinking, how many of you are young writers? Or many? So I get the vast majority of my writing done on these residency programs, and they're just kind of amazing. And what's always kind of the nicest thing about going on them is meeting young writers and meeting other writers. And this one, when we were in the Arctic, had an additional benefit of being like you had to give your cell phone away for 2 weeks, which was really nice. Like you had no access to it. It's really sweet. So the book I want to read from is this book, My Beautiful City, Austin. And I want to read an excerpt from a chapter that starts with wildflowers, just because of the weather right now. But the book is a kind of a strange book. There's 7 stories, and they're kind of they're stories about a young architect, and 6 of the stories are different commissions. Like he gets commissioned to do the kinds of houses that in Austin are now seen as being a kind of problem in Austin. You know, just like these kind of giant, monstrous things. But it's generally true in his stories that he gets it wrong each time. Like he continues to get it wrong, and the source of the book is really about missing the point. Would be arguably the best way to describe it. But it's not clear, and he's not clear about why he's missing the point either. It's not clear if he's missing the point because these are kind of strange new things, and the motivations that are driving these houses are strange new things that are coming into Austin, or if they're in fact just tendencies that were here all along that had just been tamped down to begin with, whether they're a kind of cheapness or a kind of violence, or well, you'll see in one of the stories. If those are things that are already here to begin with, whether our kind of idea of Austin is actually a kind of a strange, false idea. Now, one of the people who reviewed the book wrote that one of the things about the book that keeps coming up is this kind of sense that Austin might be their own worst enemy. So, in the stories triangulate between kind of locations and motivations and landscape and site and building, and those things are meant to kind of resonate with each other. And the reason I want to read this chapter aside from the start of the wildflowers, is that it's one of the reasons that the narrator is having a hard time understanding what's happening is that he can't actually think incisively. Like he's smart, but his ability to think his ideas keep skating laterally. And the book is written in many ways as a kind of series of like unable to confront what's going on around him. His ideas keep kind of bouncing sideways. And so for me, this is like the start, the kind of most beautiful way to describe that kind of, the most beautiful section of the book, that kind of bouncing sideways continuously in a way that seems okay. All right. So this is from the story called Keeping Austin Weird, which is the worst slogan that a city could have, I think. You know what I mean? Like y'all are really young. But here's the reason it's a terrible slogan, because the only person that would be worried about like having a slogan about weirdness would be someone who wasn't weird. Right. You know what I'm saying? So it's like by definition the slogan of a middle-aged thing. You know what I mean? Like it's by definition, you know, you're like, that's the only people who worry about being weird are middle-aged people. All right, anyway, so here, Keeping Austin Weird. There are a series of barbecue joints positioned like stations of the cross in a ring of towns around Austin. One spring weekend I drove Axel and Sabina, who are the narrator's 2 employees, both of them are German, out to Lano to eat at Cooper's. The rolling reddish ground everywhere was covered in a ridiculousness of bluebonnets to the edge of the horizon, and the car floated along. In a valley filled with flowers, we saw a lone emu, orphan of some failed agri-venture. A bit farther on, we came upon a cowboy, fully duded out and saddled up, coming towards us through the scrub cedar and cactus, riding a herd on a flock of tiny Angora sheep, the legs of which disappeared into the purple blue. Occasionally we passed cars parked on the side, the inhabitants out posing for pictures in the flowers. The Germans thought this was an idea, so we stopped, but Axel ended up standing on a fire ant mound. The stings, the pains take a few seconds, just too long to register, so that when you look down, they're already swarming all over your shoes and legs, made him nauseous. Fire ants are a relatively recent wave of invaders, one of the suspected causes for the decline in horned lizards and quail. They have immense extended colonies with multiple queens and no real enemies. To get rid of them, you have to coordinate with your neighbors and poison every nest in as large an area as possible. Sabina took some photos of the welts with her phone. After lunch, we drove back by the long route up through the Lana uplift toward Burnett, crossing Lake LBJ on the road there below the dam. The whole system of dams that controls the Colorado as it passes from the hills to the prairie, Inks, LBJ, Mansfield, Tom Miller, Longhorn, is a particular sort of marvel. Lyndon Johnson cemented his political base in Texas as a young congressman by diverting substantial WPA funding he had Roosevelt's ear to get it all going, thereby electrifying the hill country, then the poorest region in the States. There used to be a bronze bust of LBJ at the state capitol, mounted in the marble niche of what had once been a water fountain. The bust should be mounted at correct anatomical height because your mind unconsciously completes the figure. In that niche, the bust, of course, sat too low. You felt LBJ sinking through the floor to just the appropriate height for terrorizing children, or for reaching out and biting you somewhere inappropriate. That was fixed when the Capitol was recently expanded and renovated. The expansion was buried to the north of the existing building to protect the views of it from around the city. Because the expansion is underground, cell phone reception there was initially really bad. You could look down into the circular exterior courtyard carved into the new building during breaks in the legislative sessions and see it filled with lobbyists and legislators on their phone. LBJ would have been at home in that bear pit. In Austin, you'd occasionally come across his name on old plat maps, penciled in as the owner. Lyndon Johnson at Ux is what it always says. Ux, that would be Lady Bird. There are all of these stories about LBJ and how he had perfected techniques for humiliating his subordinates into yet more excruciating loyalty. The story that sticks with me is about Johnson taking his aides into the stall and making them stand there while he cracked, talking at them the whole time. I think of that story every time a client calls me on a speakerphone. The sound is just like someone speaking from a toilet stall while you're just being polite. Various people use speakerphones more than others. Not doctors, surprisingly, given the hygiene issues, but lawyers in particular, in my experience. I've had several clients as lawyers. Actually, separately, that's true. Both of my brothers are lawyers, and they use speakerphone all the time. I don't understand it. And my daughter, she's like studying to be a doctor, and she never uses speakerphone. And you're like, you look at her phone, it's like glowing with stuff. You're like, throw that away. Burn that phone. I've had several lawyers as clients. Bill Norton was a lawyer when he hired me to design his house. It turned out I'd seen him twice before I met him, once while looking into that cell phone pit at the Capitol. Bill was a notorious lobbyist, a fixture in the political world and the soft gossip columns of the newspapers, in a way that still just works in Texas, as a character. He was working then to persuade legislators to alter the definition of navigable rivers on behalf of property owners. In Texas, most rivers are legally navigable, meaning anyone has the right to move up or down them, as long as they don't set foot on the dry part of your land. Militant landowners point out this law made sense when it was in the public interest to move goods or settlers into the territory, but it wasn't intended to protect an invasion of beer-guzzling frat boys pontooning by. Bill stood out in a pit like a cartoon, in a suit and western boots, with one of those big silver beer-sopping mustaches, yelling into a tiny phone and gesticulating broadly. The mustache was what gave him away the second time I saw him, which was on that drive back from Milano. Crossing the dam at Lake LBJ on the 4-lane highway, we came up behind a flock of motorcycles, mostly big new Harleys. When I was a kid, that many motorcycles meant terror, but now every Sunday weekend you come upon these coordinated middle-aged fantasy outings, all collector hogs and designer leathers, going about 5 miles below the speed limit, everyone with headsets, moving like waves to and from worship at one of the barbecue stations. Is this a motorcycle gang? Axel asked. Well, no, I said, from the guts and the watches, this is most likely a law firm. Axel looked perplexed. So 50 yards ahead of the pack was a lone Harley in the right lane. It was a beautiful bike, a yellow Sportster, really nicely tricked out. The driver had on a black t-shirt on the back of which was written something strange in orange letters, which said, "If you can read this, the bitch fell off." So you had to look at the guy when you passed him, and there was this mustache. By coincidence, we spoke several weeks later. Bill was finishing up divorce proceedings at the time. He was in an incredible hurry to get the house done. I asked him why he wanted to build instead of buy, and he made it clear that part of his reason was he wanted to piss off his ex. All along, she'd wanted to build something new, but in the divorce, she'd settle on his old house. He didn't have a lot of input as a client, but it was clear from the start he wanted a house for the marketplace rather than too tight to fit to his own way of being. I know different people think differently about the relationship of house and home. I mean, for me, home connotes a sense of open-ended permanence, from which flows an ease about being consequent in the community. But I know people who change houses like regularly. They build one and they sell it and then they build another. I actually know some architects that do that. They design a house and then they abandon it. There was that sense with Bill, so there wasn't much point in pushing the matter. Anyhow, he didn't have to worry either. The covenants on the lot were pretty severe. He had to design the house in a style that fit with the new old age look of the community, with stone walls and multi-paned wood windows and overhanging pitched roofs, everything in earth tones, and there was an approved list of plants, and it was all controlled by a review committee. Really, it wasn't designed in any conventional sense. It was more like remaking some recipe from a cookbook, only bigger, or just picking out items from a cafeteria line. To his credit, Bill kept the reins loose, with one exception. Whenever things started looking like an architect had done them, like control or orderliness or abstraction or fetishism, then he would realign the priorities. He was superbly pragmatic. He vetoed every good-looking built-in refrigerator for one that would fit a large pizza box. But just as an aside, there are no good-looking refrigerators that fit a large pizza box. It's just, as an architect, I can tell you that. They all look terrible. And I've actually had a client that did that. This is the book is fiction. It's the one bit of nonfiction in this book. It's actually true. It's a true story. It's like this beautiful house, and it just, like you go in there, and like there's this kind of mole in the kitchen, which is this refrigerator with this pizza boxes. It's kind of really interesting. I love that house. The site was on the west side of Lake Austin, on the steep uphill side of that road, of a road running along the lake, in a gated cul-de-sac that squirmed along the contour like a large intestine. Water oak trail. The lot was towards the end, on the side closer to the lake. A dead end like that, running across a hill, is really two neighborhoods. The houses on the lower side look over the lake, they couldn't care less, and they casually turn their backs to the street. The more proper upslope houses forever have to peer over without seeming to. Usually they get really big windows, like dilated pupils. What got me thinking about those windows was I had to spend time looking at them. This really strange thing had happened. That's what I'm gonna stop. Or I could go on a little bit, I think I'll stop there. This really strange thing had happened. Yeah, this really strange thing had happened. That's all I'm gonna tell you. This really strange thing, and that then sets the story in motion. I'll tell you what the really strange thing that had happened was, because it fits into this kind of pattern of casual, shitty violence in the story, right? And someone has killed a live oak tree on the property. They've poisoned it. And that then prompts a sequence of strange events involving a kind of Randy Gardner and an arborist, and things go south from there. So I'll stop at that point.
Do you have any questions for Jerry?
The voice of your writing is somewhat surprising because every now and then you'll incorporate these like really sassy retorts. Now, do you feel like that mirrors your own personality a lot, or you just kind of...
It's really funny, because back behind you, there are some students of mine from years ago, and they're going, yeah. Yeah, so it does, although I would not write that way if it were not. So part of the book is about this young architect who like many people who come to Austin, has a series of grounding experiences in Austin. Like in this, the whole first chapter is kind of based on the sequence of grounding experiences most people have. They come at some point in time while they're growing up and they stay with friends, and some things happen and they break into Barton Springs and they skinny dip and then they kind of go out dancing and like all these kinds of things happen and you go, this can't possibly be Texas, right? And it locks this kind of vision in your mind of what the city is. And almost everyone who lives here has had that experience or had some experience like that. So from that experience, from a sequence of experiences, he built a kind of vision in his mind of what a house here could be, like what it could be about. And it's absolutely not about what any of the clients who are hiring him want their houses to be about. Right? And he assumes that they're wrong, and he's really shitty about it. Right? And it comes out in this kind of like a slightly frustrated carping, which is the kind of sassy part, right? But in actual fact, he's probably wrong. Like you can't tell. You can't tell if he's wrong or not, right? So the sassiness. So that's the one reason is there, and then the other reason is that my assumption was that this would mostly be read by architects. You're not an architect. Do you know architects?
Yes.
And don't you find them horrifically pretentious? Yes, you do. So right there, you got it right there. So part of the idea was, like, since I'm a kind of professor and I know a lot of architects, and like they assume that I'm a kind of authority figure on certain ways, like writing this in the kind of most kind of in the rudest. I mean, I had to kind of eradicate large, rude sections out of it. But it was meant to be. It was kind of meant to get at that kind of question of pretense as well, because the book is also about. So the book is about the generation of architects that came out of school who are now in power on the whole, who run offices, who came out of school in the 1980s, who came out at the time that there was really the kind of a tail in a very long recession. And for those architects, when they were in school, there were these very powerful idealistic kind of discussions that went on, but when they got out of school, there was just shame, the shame of no work. Right? And there's this kind of whole discussion about like how those things kind of shape you. And so if you look at this generation of architects who I would argue are not asking very interesting questions about like what should Austin be, or sure, I'll build that large house for you right in the middle of those wetlands, no problem. You know, this is what here, just like there's this whole kind of question about where their ethics are. So that was, I don't know how we got on that particular topic, but it had to do with kind of getting at architects and kind of forcing them to ask that question by being a little bit rude, if that makes sense. And then the other thing is, just like Drew, I also refuse to be serious about myself. Right? That's the other kind of dilemma. And now I'm really glad we're well paired, actually. I don't know if there are other questions.
Anybody else? Great.
Thank you so much.